Hey, good morning, everybody. It is good to be with you here at New Life Bremerton. So good to spend the day together. And if you walked in and you're like, hey, I was looking for Ken and you're not him, you are correct. And what's actually going on is Ken and Kelvin and a bunch of folks from here actually traveled yesterday to Dakar, Senegal. And what they're doing is leaning into this really beautiful forming kind of relational partnership that is working with a school that is enabling kids in that community to have a place where they can be cared for, they can learn, they can grow, they can flourish. I think we think that's a good thing, yes? Yes. And what's so cool about it is they're spending time to kind of lean farther into that kind of partnership. And I'm really looking forward to hearing their stories because I think we know this, like God is up to stuff here, but also there, all around the world. And so when we partner together, we're just better together. So I'm looking forward to hearing their stories of what they learned there from our friends and how actually it will impact and help our own journey with Jesus as we follow him into the neighborhood. But I also want to invite, would we pray for them this week? Would we pray a few things, I think? That one, that their time together is just rich. They're able to encourage our friends there, and even God continues to work in Ken and Kelvin and the crew's heart too. Will we also pray for wisdom, for courage, and for the provision of all that's needed for that partnership to grow, for that school to flourish, for things in that community to just bubble up with goodness? Can we pray those things together? Yeah, so would you keep them in your prayer each day? Join me in doing that as I'll be jumping in on that too. And I loved what we just heard about. This is such a season of making room. I mean, Ken and the crew are joining our friends in Senegal, making room for people to be welcomed, to flourish, to become who God has made them to be. And all that stuff we just heard about, time around the table, that's what that's about too. So I just want to extend an invite. You may have heard of the Friendsgiving thing, and you're like, I'd kind of like to do that, but I don't really know anyone or know how to do it. Myself and Roz are actually going to be hosting just this open invite Friendsgiving on Tuesday night at Crane's Castle in East Bremerton, 6 o'clock. Here's how it works. Family-friendly spot. You bring some food that you like to eat and you'd like to share with someone else, and you show up. And we'll be there together. We'll spend time together. You can play a little cornhole. Kids can play. Really cool environment. So I'd love to see you there if you want to get connected. Even the thing we're doing after our time here today, our New to New Life gathering, same thing, making room. And then another thing I wanted to mention to you, however you track your calendar, would you mark December 1st? So December 1st in the evening, we're going to be hosting this really amazing night, kind of kicking off the Christmas season with a Christmas Vision dinner. And we're going to be telling stories and kind of leaning in collectively to how God is calling us to make room for this city, to make room for our friends that actually he loves dearly, and they're going to get to know him in the coming days. So it's going to be a really great evening. Go ahead and mark your calendars for that, again, as we kind of go down the path together. One other way that we're making room this season, I don't know if you saw on the way in, but kind of just off to my right, there's some tags hanging up by the connection area. And what these are we're partnering with our friends at Olive Crest. And the tags basically say, hey, would you take a tag, provide a gift for a kid in foster care, bring them back next week as a way we can express just tangible love. So like this one says, hey, this would be for a 6-year-old boy, Pokemon cards, Lego set, GameStop gift card, portable charger, or a Kindle reader. Like gives you some ideas for gifts and then bring them back next week. Who's in to grab a tag today? I think that's a good idea, yeah? So on the way out, go ahead and grab one of those and again, bring that back next week. So today we are kind of continuing in a journey we've been on together. It's a really interesting one because what we're doing is looking at this little letter at the end of the New Testament known as James. That's the author's name. And it's an interesting letter for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons I think it's interesting, it really kind of comes across like this manifesto. Like here's how to actually live on the ground in the Jesus way. So we have this information about Jesus, we've seen, we've heard, but what does it look like to put it in practice, to put our faith in motion? And so we've been kind of tracking along with James, and I love it because you can feel his own experience coming through his letter. I don't know if you know this, but even though James is a brother of Jesus, when we first meet him in the biblical story in John 7, he and his other siblings are totally mocking Jesus. They don't believe in him. They are so skeptical and cynical, as most siblings would probably be, but they even take it further, and it seems like we don't know when, but somehow James, watching Jesus, watching his life, watching how he interacted with people, watching how he sat around the table, he offered hospitality to everyone, watching how he gave himself sacrificially on a cross, watching his resurrection that death cannot even hold him, right? watching all of that, participating in that, somehow he moves from skeptic to this full-in follower of Jesus. And then a little later, we find in Galatians that he's not only but he's become a pillar of the church. He's actually helping forward Jesus' mission from skeptic to all in, moving the mission forward. And that's kind of my story, actually. So I'm really intrigued to listen to him, to his invitation into this manifesto life. And so far, what we've learned from him is that the Jesus way looks like this. In a world that's divided, Jesus' people don't play favorites. We actually put people groups back together. We actually open our tables to everyone. He's also led us into this path that says, in a world of outrage and combative words, Jesus people, or the Jesus way, is where we tame the tongue, and where we maybe used to have done divisive things with our words, our mouths, we now offer blessing. He's also led us into this practice that Jesus people, instead of fighting and all kinds of things of that nature, we embody humility, which restores, which reconciles. And then last week, we see that James asked us or invited us into this posture that in a world where resources are looked at too often as scarce, where they're hoarded, Jesus people embody this open-handed approach where we generously share what we have for the sake of God's healing work in the world. And so today, we're going to keep tracking along with James, and here's how he sets up what we're going to look at. In James chapter 5, verse 7, he says, "Dear brothers and sisters, be patient as you wait for the Lord's return." So James wants to invite us today into a conversation on patience. Now, I'm encouraged right now that you didn't get up and leave, because a conversation about patience, that can be difficult, right? I don't know if you're like me, but I'm kind of often find myself in this place where I just texted you like a second ago and you haven't responded yet. Is it me? Is it you? Is it what's going on? And especially if you have on the read receipts, I know you saw it. What are you waiting for? Okay, you're like me. I got it. I was thinking about patience and all this kind of stuff, and I was thinking about this phrase we know: patience is a virtue. Yeah. So did you know there's a website, patienceisavirtue.org? So I went to it. Okay, that would be funny, but I spent the whole last week doing nothing other than waiting for this to load. No, I'm just teasing. But that is fitting because it's a virtue, but doesn't it feel like that sometime? I want to lean in, but my goodness, how long? There's this kind of agitation under the surface, at least for me. And I think patience is something that's hard, and that a lot of us could just say, man, impatience is a lot easier. I was thinking about that, and I came across this. Did you know that 96% of Americans will knowingly consume extremely hot food or drink that will actually burn their mouth, like horribly? You won't be able to speak. And I want to offer that up, a little bit of a public service announcement. We're in the holiday season. Festive hot beverages are coming your way. You'll drink them anyway. I was thinking about that as well, and listen to this. Did you know that more than half of folks will hang up the phone if they've been on hold for a minute or less? So you have to call and deal with that account or whatever that's going on. And I get it. We only have so much bandwidth. When the 80s rock music starts playing in the background, we have about one chorus in us and then we're out, right? We just can't wait. I was thinking about that as well. And did you know that 71% of us frequently exceed the speed limit to get where we're going faster? Well, of course we do. When I read that stat, I was like, I want to meet the other 29%. I don't know you. Where are you? And I was talking about this with some friends of mine, and they were like, well, everything around us is kind of geared that way. We actually live in this culture where there's this big industry, you might call it, of impatience. We have Instagram, because you have to take that photo of that thing and post it in that moment or it didn't happen. We have the Instapot, which I actually love, because that thing that used to take 8 hours to cook, we get it in 15 minutes. So good. And what about Velcro? Come on, the shoes? Because sometimes making the bunny ears and going around the thing, we have no time for that. Or my favorite, actually not. Did you know Audible, for listening to audiobooks, has where you can listen to your book read at 3 times the speed? I do well enough to listen at 1 speed, but 3? kind of sounds better because then we're done. No, like we are surrounded by, I think as my friend said, these industries of impatience. And James today wants to invite us into a way that not just with those kind of surface level things that happen throughout life that we all can be impatient about, but James wants to invite us today into a life where when the things that we'd rather not be dealing with happen, and it's hard to be patient with them, that we can actually trust God and find a way of patience in them that actually really will resource us, refuel us, and help us flourish. I say that because that text we read, dear brothers and sisters, be patient as you wait for the Lord's return. So we've been reading through James, and as we've read, we've learned that the folks he's talking to, many of them have been experiencing a lot of oppression. They have been dealing with people mistreating them. They have found themselves in situations they'd rather not be in, and they should not be in. Things that are not fair are happening to them. And that is actually the group James is talking to. He's like, even though you're going through this heavy season, there is a way of patience. But it's not just like, don't do anything. It's not just like flounder. The encouragement or the invitation to have patience is rooted in something really powerful and beautiful that we're going to unpack together in a moment. It's be patient because of the Lord's return. And I'll give you a little clue. Again, we'll come back to this. What he's saying is the Jesus who we've met, the Jesus way that is so inviting and so intriguing, the Jesus who is our liberator, the one who includes us, the one who always has an open table, the way he came offering that, he will also come back and deal with the stuff that needs to be made right. So in the midst of it, hang on, wait, and actually don't be undone. And he's inviting those friends into it, and he's inviting us into it as well. It's interesting that James uses a word even that kind of gives us what patience is. This really clear term for patience. The word he uses for it is something that takes a long time to boil, the way of endurance. And that's what we're invited into today. So what we're going to do is look at James chapter 5 and some ways that he shows us how patience grows. And we're going to lean into those together. So the first one he offers us is, if you want to grow patience, eagerly look ahead. So if we pick it up in the second half of verse 7 on into verse 8, James says, consider the farmers who patiently wait for the rains in the fall and in the spring. They eagerly look for the valuable harvest to ripen. You too must be patient. Take courage, for the coming of the Lord is near. So James uses this farmer analogy. And I think it's one we can even kind of wrap around and kind of get what's going on. Imagine you have this people. Their history has been tied up in every year putting something in the ground that they can't actually see what's going on under the surface, but putting something there that they have no control over and waiting for it to bloom. They also look ahead anticipating that there will be rain, that there will be conditions to make this thing grow. And James encourages them to do so, and I think the logic behind it is this. Look at the farmer. They do it because they've seen this story before. They've seen this pattern year in and year out. I mean, I think it's timely that we would hear this word right now. So I'm a person, I love a little bit of gardening. I love getting my hands in the dirt. And we're at a season right now where all of that has kind of hit the pause button. All the beauty of growth from summer is now actually moved on, it seems. And we could be tempted to think, there's nothing growing. There's nothing happening. There's nothing giving life in the midst of these days that seem a little more maybe in the pause button mode again. But under the soil, all kinds of good is happening. All kinds of magic is happening. All kinds of the sustaining reality that God built into the world is happening. And did you know that we can count on, come next spring, things will grow. Come next summer, things will bloom. Right in the middle of winter, when we're like, oh, I'm ready for the beach, I'm ready for the warmth of summer, we can count on that it'll come and it'll flourish. And James is encouraging this early Christian community to look at the farmer, consider their posture of anticipating, of looking ahead. And again, he does it because they've seen this pattern before. And he links it to Jesus for us when it's waiting in patience. Why would we wait in patience? Because we've seen Jesus show up. We know we can count on the one who welcomes us to the table again. We know we can count on the Jesus who says, I am always with you. I will never leave you. I've got your back. We can count on the Jesus that James is saying, the Jesus who told us he will return. He will set things as they should be. So to eagerly look ahead means to look that way. Jesus' early followers even struggle with this a little bit. You may or may not know, but there's a scene right after Jesus has been crucified and then raised from the dead. He's actually telling his friends and followers, look, I'm going to send you now into the world to be my emissaries, my representatives. I want you to go do the stuff I've been doing. Love, create room, heal, be blessing. Announce that there is a new way to be human, a whole new world possible. Go do that. And then Jesus actually disappears. Part of the biblical story of Jesus is his life, his death, his resurrection, and then his ascension. And at that point, some of his friends were what's going on? And it's interesting, in Acts chapter 1, some angels show up and say, hey, why are you standing here staring up at the sky? Jesus has been taken, yeah, but someday he will return from heaven in the same way that you saw him go. And that's what James is trying to encourage that early Christian community who, again, are dealing with people treating them as they should not be treated, with situations they'd rather not be in. That Jesus is actually going to come and make it right. And so Austin asked earlier, hey, what'd you come in here with? And we come with all of our lives, right? We come with a lot of joy, but we also do come with things that we wish weren't as they are. I was thinking through my own life. You may or may not know this about me, but I went through a long period of time of battling addiction. It was dark and heavy. It was not how I wanted it to be. I've gone through seasons where relationships were fractured and torn and not the way they're supposed to be. I've been in circumstances where someone did something that was not deserved by me. And I was put in a position that I did not actually belong in or deserve to be in. Maybe you're like that, and you can also say, maybe when it comes to your work, your career, your vocation, the thing you know is your calling in the world, it's not happening as fast as you'd want it to happen. And we could keep making, I think, lists of things that we know what that feels like. What James is saying to that early church and through the Spirit to us is, when you find yourself in that place that you want to run away from, that you want to ignore, that you want to take matters into your own hands, patiently wait, because the Jesus who has showed up to you is always with you, and he will return and make it right. I don't know if you know this is part of our story, but right at the end of the Bible, Revelation 21, there's this vision for when Jesus returns, says, look, God's home is now among his people. He will live with them, and they will be his people. God himself will be with them. And I love this. He will wipe every tear from their eye. And there will be no more death, no more sorrow, no more crying, no more pain, because all those things will be gone forever. That is our story. That is what we're made for. So whatever you feel like you're waiting in right now, you have Jesus who is present with you now, and Jesus who will resolve it finally in the coming days. And James would encourage us to eagerly look ahead if we want to grow in patience. If you're curious about maybe a practical way to do this, I think it's kind of interesting we're talking about this today, because in just a couple of weeks, there's a season that a lot of Jesus followers throughout the century have kind of leaned into. It's almost like this training season for the soul, a training season to help us live into this patient, waiting, trusting posture that James is talking about. It's called Advent. I don't know if you've ever heard about it. I didn't grow up in a formal religious setting at all, so I don't come by it that way. But I began following Jesus, and I had some friends who said, hey, this is a season where we get ourselves ready for Easter. What does that mean? Advent is a time where we look at the world Jesus came into with all of its darkness and all of its pain and all of its heaviness. We tell the truth about what's up in the world. And one of the practices in Advent that I love is each day of the season, you light one candle. Well, the very first night you light a candle, imagine in a dark room, one little tiny candle, how much light can actually be present. But as the days grow, man, the room becomes just awash in light. And it's this time of training ourselves to look for that, to wait for that, to know and have faith that that is coming, that that is our story. And so I'd invite you into it. Advent, where we learn to look at the world Jesus came into and the light he's brought to the world. And you know what's so cool and I think creative that those early brothers and sisters put that season together? It's not just looking back at Jesus' first coming or Advent. It actually looks ahead to the one that James is talking about, the Lord's return, because the one who came is coming again and will make all things well. And so today, if we need help growing in patience, may we eagerly look ahead. James also then says, don't just look ahead though. There's something you can do right now. And I love the relationship of both of these in tandem. He says, take courage for today. In chapter 5, verse 8, we see those literal words, take courage because of this thing you're looking forward to, you're looking ahead to, the coming of the Lord. There's this great line by Maya Angelou that says, courage is the most important of all the virtues because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. So remember, patience is a virtue, and I think she's right. Courage is the way we lean into being patient. Courage is the way we look at what's going on in the moment. We look ahead to what's true, and then we say, what can I do right now as I trust the things that only God can handle to God, but I actually take action on the things I can do something about. And a friend gave me a great little practice that you might find helpful. Take a piece of paper. In the middle, draw a box. Now take the situation that you're struggling to have patience in and begin to write down all the parts of it. Let's say it's a relational rift that you wish weren't there, that you're waiting for it to be healed or reconciled. Inside the box, you would write all the things that you actually can control. So like in relationships, when they're broken, can we affect or can we actually, control what the other person does? Can we control how long it might take? There's a lot of things we can't control, but there are some things we can control. I can control my posture towards that person. I can control what I say about that person. You follow? So I'm going to write all those things inside the box, the things I can control. But all the other things, because there are other things. There are things to be honest about that make us hurt and ache and long. Write those down too. Be honest about them, but write them outside of the box. And then hold that paper and say, so Jesus, what's in the box, I'm going to live into. What's outside the box, you got to handle. And we lean into that courageous act of patience in that way. James goes on and says, not only do we look ahead and take courage for the day if we want to grow in patience, but he also brings up something that's a little bit interesting to me. He says, don't grumble. If you want to grow in patience, don't grumble. Okay, so I don't know about you, but when I get impatient about anything, that kind of is my go-to move, is to lash out. But instead of that, he says, don't grumble about each other, brothers and sisters. But this is where it gets interesting, or you will be judged. For look, the judge is standing at the door. So again, I get the grumbling part, the temptation to lash out. I've done it too often to the people I love. And I have a long track record of coming back and saying, I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? I am like in a long haul journey of learning to be patient. I'll just tell you now. And I get that part, don't grumble. But I think it's interesting that he brings up this judging thing. What's he getting at? Remember earlier I mentioned that James's friends, many of them had been under the thumb of those who were wealthy and were withholding from them, those who were treating them wrongly with the power that they had over them. So there was some oppression going on. And James seems to be saying to his friends, instead of lashing out or moving, whether it be with your words or in any way in violence, actually don't grumble, let God take care of it. The judging comments really are kind of rooted in this biblical theme that God is the one who will bring about what needs to be brought about. God can be trusted to work this out, to give people what they deserve. That may sound forceful and harsh, but listen to this. In Deuteronomy chapter 32, I will take vengeance or revenge, says the Lord. I will pay them back. Indeed, the Lord will give justice to his people. And James is kind of riffing on that and saying, so when you go through stuff and you're tempted to lash out because you're treated unfairly, you didn't get what you deserved, instead of doing that, trust that God will actually handle that stuff. Let God go to bat for you. Let God fight your battles. And instead of lashing out, instead of grumbling, instead of being harsh, there's another way. And I was thinking about that. It's interesting if you look throughout history, all kinds of movements where people have found themselves under the weight of others with power and being mistreated. It's interesting to me how often they write songs and poems and they sing a different song, not the song of lashing out, not the song of grumbling, but they'll sing a song of hope. They'll sing a song of overcoming that and letting God actually fight the battle. And so maybe a practical thing for us when we're tempted to grumble or lash out in the midst of impatience, maybe we can just start singing. I actually think the band gave us a couple of tunes today about hope, about even when I don't see it, you're working, right? You just start singing that. Like, what if we put grumbling down and where we're tempted to do it, we start to sing hope. We start to tell the truth about the God who has our back and will fight our battles. James says, man, that will build patience in you. And you know what I actually love about our God? He doesn't say stuff all the feelings of anger, the feelings of not understanding. He doesn't say stuff and hide from those. I don't know if you know that. God is wide open. When you find yourself in a spot that you shouldn't have to be in, and it's hard to be patient and wait, listen to this. The Psalms, which are actually our prayer book. I don't know if you know that. The Psalms are the prayer book of the people of God throughout the ages. And in Psalm 13, one of God's followers says, hey, God, how long will you forget me? Forever? How long will you look the other way? How long must I struggle with anguish in my soul? How long? This person is just telling the truth. But notice where it's directed, not grumbling or bringing about something harsh towards another human, taking it up with God, the one who will fight our battles. We can talk to him honestly. The person, though, somehow comes to this place. Even though I hold that, I feel that, that's in my gut, I do know this too. I know I can trust in your unfailing love, and I will rejoice because you have rescued me. I will sing to the Lord because he is good to me. Again, I will sing. I will not grumble. If you're here and you're walking through some stuff that feels heavy and it's hard to wait for God's liberation, I would encourage you, go through the Psalms. You're going to find one that says exactly what you feel. And just sit with it and talk to God about it and sing to him about it. And let him have the last word. Let him fight your battles. Let him bring about what needs to happen. So James says, eagerly look ahead, take courage for today, don't grumble. And then lastly, he says, we're not alone. So if you want to grow in patience, look to the example of others. Be inspired by the example of others that we're walking with. In James chapter 5, verse 10, for examples of patience and suffering, dear brothers and sisters, look at the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. We give great honor to those who endure under suffering. For instance, you know about Job, a man of great endurance. You can see how the Lord was kind to him at the end, for the Lord is full of tenderness and mercy. I actually love that James does this. So I want to invite you to do something for me for just a minute. Like, actually just look around this room. Like, kind of turn around and look. Like, we are not alone. First off, there's some really great looking people around you, right? We are not alone. We are not alone in this journey with Jesus. And I think we all know there's something powerful when we hear each other's stories of endurance, when we tell our stories of patient endurance. Are you like me? I'll hear stories of both historical folk and then maybe people you've never met, of how they endured sickness or how they endured a situation, and it inspires me to grow in that. Anyone like me in that? Those stories like fuel us. They resource us, and that's what James is saying. You might not have a clue who these biblical prophets he's talking about are, but his friends knew. And so he'd be saying to us, who are the people stories you know that you should remember them, rehearse them, let them remind you. We find that a lot of those biblical prophets had faith in God and didn't actually see the thing they were waiting for, but they still leaned into it. He's like, listen to stories like that. He brings up Job. Job is this really interesting story to me. It's a really ancient Hebrew story we find in the Old Testament of a man whose life was seemingly all put together. And then in an instant, it comes crashing down. In an instant. And as the story unfolds, it's raw, it's real. Kind of like that psalm. And yet God does bring it about. Flourishing, renewal, restoration. I was just this weekend traveling with some friends, and there was a guy on the trip that I had met. He was a friend of some of my friends. And he began to tell a story of how his family had built this business, and it was strong and flourishing and good, and they worked hard to make it what it was. It was going great. And due to some stuff that they had no control over, like seriously in an instant, It was gone. And with it, all of their savings, all the stuff they had planned for, all the stuff that they had built up and trusted in. And he began to tell his story of how God sustained him in the most small of ways. And God still sustained him today. And seriously, I'll never forget that story. And I would encourage us, let's tell our stories. That's one of the reasons we're gathering around the table, is we share our stories with each other. And we are encouraged and we're emboldened to be a people who are patient, who wait, who trust in God. That's what we're invited into. And so whose story might you look into to be encouraged, to follow that example, to be bolstered and strengthened? All of this we've been talking about. James's way to grow in patience, eagerly looking ahead, taking courage today, not grumbling, and being inspired by the examples of others. All of those things really lead to this Jesus way of patience, which is anticipation. Where you're at right now is not the end of the story. If you came in here today and you're struggling with something you wish was over, your body is maybe not as well as you'd want it to be. Your relationships aren't where you want them to be. I mentioned my own battle with addiction. Maybe you're there and you're not where you want to be. And we could just keep listing them off, right? That is not the end. That is not where your story is going. Your story is going to a place like this, that you are always welcomed at the table of Jesus, that you always belong, that there will come a day, I don't know exactly when it is. It could be today. It may not be today, but there is coming a day when everything that's wrong will be made right. That is your story. That is my story. That is the story for our neighbors that we're invited into today. That we would embrace patient waiting because of that fact. The one who has come is coming again and is with us now. Today, I'd like to encourage you to join me in asking God, how do I respond to what I've heard? How do I respond? There's a Connect card that you got on the way in. I'd encourage you to grab that and consider how to respond. Maybe for some of us, we've been hearing this, and the first place to start is this. I am in a spot. I have these kind of seasons of my life I'm finding myself in, and they are weighty, and they are heavy, and I am impatient. I think today, if you're not here already, I would say, would you say yes to Jesus, the one who wants to walk with you through it? The one we've been talking about, who has come and is coming. The one who will bear the weight for you. The one who will heal you. The one who will keep his promises, as we sang about. If you haven't done that today, it's time. You're not made to go this alone. If you're here and you have said yes to Jesus, I'll just tell you the truth. I have a habit of saying yes to Jesus over and over and over again. And maybe today, as you're trying to think about the stuff you're wrestling with, you just need to be reminded that the one who started that good work in you will be faithful to complete it. Maybe you're here and in the weight of life, you've actually distanced yourself from others. You've kind of moved towards isolation. And if you don't know where to start to kind of kick that back in gear, to join with others whose story you can hear, who can encourage you, who can fuel you through the journey, come hang out with us on Tuesday night at Crane's Castle at 6. It's pretty easy. Gather around the table, eat some food, make some friends. I don't know fully how God would have you to respond, but I'd love you to take a few minutes. Take the card. If there's a box there that fits, use it. There's this great open space, though, that says, my response is. Lean into that. There's also prayer space here. You want the team to pray for you, we will. We are all in on that. There's also some of us here today that would pray for you if you want to be prayed for. Jeremy's in the back of the room here and would love to do that with you. I don't know again how God would have you respond, but you are in the midst of a story that is not done yet, with a God who loves you, who is here and who's coming. So let's take a few minutes and respond. And in a few minutes, the band will lead us into a song of worship and send us out into the world to be the patient people of God, who through our own lives demonstrate the goodness of the one who has come and is to come.